welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your host, Buddy Sotello Esquire, and Evan Ginzburg, and special guest host, Mike Lano. Mike, would you like to introduce our very wonderful guest for tonight?
Well, she was the second person after Evan to email me that our Mark Bujan had passed away. Tonight's a tribute show that Evan put together, and she would like to talk about Mark. She had, I've known Mary forever, but she and Mark had their own history discussing the things that Mark loved to cover: Detroit, Ohio, Toronto wrestling, Pittsburgh wrestling, etc. And her dad, of course, the great legendary Pampero Firpo, who was a particular favorite of mine. And so we're honored to have Mary on with us. And Ev, I'll throw to you.
All right. And we also have Mark Nowotarski, noted filmmaker, multiple documentaries, including 2 documentaries on Detroit wrestling and one on the original Sheet. And tell us, Mark, about the poster behind you.
Well, the photo there is a photo that I myself took of Mark in his office back in October of last year. And here, if I'm pointing correctly, that is a series of the documentaries that I have done. The Sheik Wrestling's Greatest Villain, its follow-up, Battles, Bouts, and Brawls, which was broadcast as a fundraiser on PBS. Also, a documentary which was also on PBS on the world's floating zip code. There is a tugboat on the Detroit River that is actually a registered post office. And it is in its 5th generation in the same bloodline, exclusive to the planet.
There you go.
That is what you have there. You also have on the bottom a quasi-documentary I did called Detroit Television Memories. And among them it had local origination wrestling, the show that was the template for the Oprah Winfrey show, which was called Kelly and Company. And as a matter of fact, on that show, Kelly and Company, the Sheik himself made one of his rare appearances on that show.
Wow.
Did he talk or just do the grunting thing?
Well, he talked. He did his thing. He did his gibberish, but he had a interpreter there.
There you go. And Mary, your dad, Pampero Firpo, was a huge part of Detroit wrestling. And tell us about all of your connection with Mark Bujan, which is really the focus of the show. A tribute to Mark, who's Mark was a noted historian and just a passionate supporter of pro wrestling. And we're all here to honor him tonight. Mary, tell us about your relationship, your friendship with Mark.
Hi, Evan. Thank you for having me on the show. I saw the news on Twitter that Mark had passed away, and my stomach just sank. And I started sending emails. I emailed Mike and contacting people like my brother, who also had a really nice friendship with Mark. And I was looking at my email, and we connected in 2011. And so it didn't feel like I knew my Mark forever, but it also didn't feel like that long. I thought, wow, we've been in contact for the last 10 years. And he reached out to me. Somebody had given him my email, and my dad passed in 2020. So we had a nice communication for 9 years before my dad passed. And Mark just knew everything. He was so thoughtful and kind, and he sent me an email, and I wrote back that I was thrilled to hear from him, and I appreciated that he was committed to keeping all the stories alive. And Detroit was such a great part of my father's wrestling history. You know, Pampero Firpo came into the territory in 1972. He debuted. I was listening to all the notes that Mark gave me. But they did a podcast about my dad on the Dave Dynasty show, and George Shire from the Minneapolis territory was there, and Mark was supposed to be on the show. This was in early 2020, right after my dad passed, but Mark had a cold, and so he had written all these notes. He said, I lost my voice, and then Dave and George were reading the notes. So I was reading all the notes. So Mark said that my dad had debuted in 1972, and he said, I was there for it, and the lights went out, and Louis Martinez, the baby face, was in the ring, and he said, suddenly your dad came charging out and the wild hair, and he said, I'll never forget it. And he said we think about these things from our childhood that just stay with us for the rest of our lives. So he always told colorful stories. I have probably 100 emails from him just going back. I was scrolling through over the last 10 years, and always quick to offer a kind word, to answer a question. He sent my dad and me, when my dad was still living, this is Mark James' wrestling record book from Detroit, 1964 to 1980. And Mark wrote a really nice dedication. He wrote, "To Mary Firpo and the entire Kochmanian family, enjoy the book. Thanks for the memories of your time in Detroit for big time wrestling, Mark Bujan." So he just was always very warm. This is such a great book. And I left this in here. I was looking at this the other day, and my dad put this napkin in here as a bookmark. And so I left that in just the way it was. He loved perusing through that. And the other book I have here about the Detroit territory is Brian Bucantis' Detroit Wrestling 1965 through 1980 photo album. So if I had any questions about anything in here, I would just send Mark an email or hit him up that way. And he was just wonderful. You know, for me, this was 19, you know, my dad debuted in 1972. I wasn't born until 75. So I missed the live action, and my dad really kept my brother, my sister, me and my mom separate from the business. So I missed his runs in Detroit, or I was like 1 year old, 2 years old when he had his program with the Sheik in 76. So
Evan was born in 75 too, 1875.
Yeah, 1875. So Mary, what does it mean to you as the daughter of a legendary wrestler that a historian such as Mark Bujan has helped keep your dad's legacy alive? What does that mean to you?
It means the world to me, because that my dad loved professional wrestling. He was a part of it from 1952, his debut match in Buenos Aires, Argentina, which was his hometown. And his dream was to make it to the United States. And that was his dream since he was a little boy, and to bring his sisters and his parents here from Buenos Aires, which he did. And so it's a part of my family's history, and it's such an important part. From professional wrestling, my dad achieved his dream, and he always said he accomplished his legacy. He wrestled through South America into Mexico and debuted in Texas in the 1950s. His first match against Don Leo Jonathan was booked by Morris Siegel. And so, you know, that was in the 50s. And at that time, as all of you know so well, all the territories, and he made it to Detroit and had such he really loved Detroit. He loved the crowds. He loved the fans. There were sellouts. You know, Mark said your dad was responsible for a lot of those sellouts in like 1973, wrestling with the Sheik and Bobo Brazil and Killer Tim Brooks and Tex McKenzie and even Hartford Love, and just all, you know, it was just such a great piece of history. And it pleased me so much that Mark was so passionate. He had his Facebook groups too, the Detroit, Toronto, and Ohio Facebook groups with wrestling memories. And it meant the world to me, because different fans would send my brother and me fan letters and ask for autographs and recollections. And as my dad got older the last couple of years, his memory wasn't strong, but those were the things that he remembered. So the fact that Mark was filling in some of those gaps at that point that my dad was no longer able to fill in, and then I could converse and share those with my dad, his face would light up, and we would talk about those old days. You know, he missed those old days. So it meant the world to me. I was really very, very sad when I heard about his passing, as I'm sure so many of us were, that he made such good connections with.
Let me just say one thing about Mark, since this is a tribute to him. All of the work he did was selfless. There was no profit motive. He wasn't making money off of any of these pages or the countless hours he put into it. This was just somebody who loved the business and devoted himself to it. And when he passed, I was very moved, because, you know, in the wrestling business, people always have good and bad to say. When Mike and I go, it'll be split somewhere down the middle, because we speak our minds and not everybody loves us. But you know, Mark, I didn't see one bad word about him. I mean, everybody was just, he was a wonderful guy. He did nothing but help. He couldn't do enough to support everybody. And it was just really an outpouring of love. And, you know, just, it was sad that he left us so young, because by today's standards, 61 is young, you know. So we really glad to be doing this tonight. And Mark, why don't you add to the equation? Because you're the one who told me. You guys were very close.
Well, we were. As a matter of fact, Mary, you may not be aware of it, but Mark was kind enough to be the go-between person, if you will. Back when I was doing the Battles, Bouts, and Brawls project, the history of pro wrestling in Detroit, Mark had approached you. I wanted your father to go on camera and be part. We would have come down there, and Mark had consulted with you to see if that was possible, and regretfully, your father was not in the physical, at the very least, condition to participate in that. However, not that it would make up for it in any way or shape, was I did uncover an archival radio interview that your father did, and I had put that in the program. So your father was in that program, and I will say thank you, for communicating with Mark for that. But when to continue about Mark was a selfless individual. Just to reaffirm what Evan has said, he had a true passion for wrestling, and just as you had mentioned, he just enjoyed it. He spoke with everybody, no matter what anybody's given opinion was of A, B, C, or D. Mark listened, Mark absorbed, Mark got along with everybody. And if Mark did not have an answer to any given question, if he couldn't look it up, he would do everything within his power and then some to try to get you whatever answer that you may need. And Mark knew people all over the world, going to Australia, the land down under, and he could actually understand the way some of those accents went. So even above and beyond. But no, Mark, the professional wrestling world and those that have an appetite to learn about its history really is. I don't believe it's taken its toll yet on the tremendous loss of Mark. He was in his office. He was in his work area when this occurred. So right down to the very last moment. Just a good man, and once again, just as Evan has said, I don't know anybody that had anything ever to say negative about him. I mean, everybody.
I should point out, guys, that he wasn't just a fan and historian, but he also promoted some shows with quite a few other fellow Detroit area historians and wrestlers and folks like that. And he was keeping people abreast of Detroit legends still alive, like Fred Curry, Bull Curry's son, Tim Brooks before we lost him, Tony Marino, who I believe thankfully is still alive, Don Kent, who I believe hopefully is still alive too. And so it's good to have those conduits. I also want to point out that Mary, in X amount of time, even though Firp kept her sort of kayfabed, her family, her mom and brother, etc., she's turned into quite the historian. And so you'll see her on a lot of things. She was with me when we had Abby on for over an hour, Abdul the Butcher, who actually showed on that COVID Con charity thing. And Mary can keep up with almost anybody on history, which is very impressive. There's not that many. There's Barbara Goodish, Bruiser Brody's widow, and not that many really relish and know and absorb the history as Mary has. So we're proud of her, and I'm sure she had, was able to get that across to Mark in their conversations.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. One of the things that was just mentioned about Mark being a conduit, so many Marks when Mark said that Mark was a conduit with the battles and brawls. He also, I forgot, this was such an important piece. Mark Bujan gave me the phone numbers for Fred Curry, Jim Rashke, Don Leo Jonathan, and there were a couple more. I'm going to rack my brain right now. And I was able to connect with all of those men that my dad just loved. He loved Fred Curry. Fred, I'm guessing, is in his late 60s or 70s. And my dad still said, Fred was such a good kid. He goes, Freddie was such a good kid, right? He still said that. And he was able to talk. My dad was able to talk on the phone and share some memories when he wasn't physically able to travel anymore, but he enjoyed talking to those colleagues. And that was from Mark. I forgot to mention that. So that was just a real blessing. And my brother got a huge kick out of that too, just hearing and seeing my dad so excited to have connected with those important people that he loved from his past.
What was Barry? Let me actually ask you, when did he pull you aside and finally smarten you up, or you had started getting interested in finding out about his wild and crazy life? And I don't even know, I think he cut his long hair and beard off when he came to Ray Stevens' funeral with us in Newark, California, probably around 96. So did he, how did that come about? And how did he sort of smarten you up on his life and everything?
So he never smartened me up ever, because he said that was his professional ethic, that he never spilled any secrets about anything. People had suggested that he write a book, and that would just be completely antithetical to anything that he stood for. He's like, this was just protecting the fraternity, protecting the locker room, the people he worked with. So he never actually smartened me up at all. In fact, when I was younger, I mentioned at my dad's funeral that I was so glad Mike was able to attend. I mentioned that my dad used to come to my classroom for show and tell when I was a little girl. And then he did that later when I was a teacher. He would come. I teach 6th grade, and I've been teaching since I was 22. And my dad would come to my class when he was in his early 70s and talk to the kids. And these were 5th graders. And this was during the Monday Night Wars with WWE and WCW. And the wrestling had that resurgence where the kids were doing Wolfpack signs and talking about Stone Cold and, Degeneration X and all of that. And so they were really interested in wrestling, and they would talk to my dad, and, they would say something like, well, is it fake? And he said, there's nothing fake about it. It's a very touchy word with me. So he protected everything from the beginning to the end. And honestly, just in my friendships with people I'm seeing here on the screen and people like Mark Bujan, that was really what smartened me up, is just doing research, having people contact me, listening to podcasts, people like Jim Cornette, people like Dave Meltzer, who's also able to attend the funeral, reading the things that they wrote about that era, and just starting to piece things together. And the other thing, when you said, when did he smarten me up? My dad had kept a bunch of scrapbooks, and I sent one of those to Mark Bujan, and he wrote this lovely thank you note. He said, this just pleases me so much that this is from your dad's collection. I'm so glad that I did that. When Mark and I first got in touch, Mark Bujan, I said, I'm going to send you this, because he was so sweet to send me these different books and these things and fill in these gaps. So I sent him one of my dad's scrapbooks, and he was the one who kind of, again, could smarten me up and fill in the gaps on things, because my dad really wouldn't talk about it. And another person who I call with questions is Joanne Dusick, the daughter of promoter Joe Dusick, and the Dusick family was instrumental in training my dad. He trained with Emil and Ernie and Rudy and Joe and the whole group. And so Joanne Dusick is in her 80s, and in my dad's collection, he has programs from the Nebraska, when he was in Omaha wrestling for Joe. And my brother pointed this out the other day. We were looking through some of my dad's things, and there was a flyer from Joe Dusick's territory with a card from the 1960s, and it said, if you want to advertise here, call Joanne. And it was still their home phone number that Joanne still has. I call her every Sunday, and we talk about things. And there was a story where my dad had allegedly been stabbed by a rowdy crowd in Omaha, and I said, did that happen? And she said no. So I still don't know. She said no, he had surgery, and she said, I think it was some kind of intestinal perforation, but the story that my dad came up with was that he was stabbed by a rowdy crowd. And that was when my dad started wearing this shirt over his trunks, because before he used to wrestle with his chest showing. Then he had a long vertical scar. And so, I still ask things kayfabe to Joanne, and she's, she tells me these days. But right at the very end of his life, like the last 5 or 6 years, he started talking a little bit more. But I think Mike is so kind to say that I have any kind of knowledge of history, because I feel like it's just the tip of an iceberg. But a lot of what I've acquired is just by, asking Mike questions and, watching.
That's a question that I have for you. And that is, why do you think your dad didn't want to talk much about wrestling? and his wrestling?
That's a really good question. That is how he made his living, because one of the things that Mark said in the Dave Dynasty podcast tribute show to my dad after my dad passed was, he said, Firpo made you believe. And he said, Mark had said that when he talked to Nick Bockwinkel, who had a program with my dad in the AWA, for Vernie, or I think George Shire might have said this, and Mark agreed. He said, Firpo, he said, Nick said that Firpo was stiff to work with, didn't take a lot of bumps, he said, but he made you believe. He said, you believed that he was real. And that was, people sometimes compare him to the Sheik as far as his preservation of his gimmick. Like, he lived his gimmick, not with our family, but when he was out in public. And so I think that that was his respect for the business, and that was how he was. Do you have any
stories about when he had to be in character with you in public? Like,
I wish I did. Unfortunately, again, I was born so late into his career that by the time I have any memories of in the early 1980s, I was 5 years old in 1980. He was already at the end of his career, and he virtually got out of wrestling in 81. And then after he was done with wrestling, he would get recognized, because we live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he wrestled in, for Warwickshire, the Cow Palace, and down the road and everything. Yes, exactly.
I'm in Novato.
Yeah. So people recognized him. He didn't act in character or kayfabe after his career was over. But my mom and my dad's mom, my grandmother, have stories where they would go to restaurants with him and things, and he'd have to like snarl at the wait staff and maybe like order some raw meat so that he could like pretend to be eating that. So he definitely stayed in character. He had a very, very tight inner circle, like very, very tight, and there were people in the business. And his family, like his sisters. In fact, his sisters are in some of the scrapbook photos from Body Press, from the Detroit magazine. And when my dad was allegedly blinded by the Sheik, the nurse next to him was his sister in nurse. And it was so funny too. I told my parents divorced when I was 10, but they're very amicable. And I told my mom maybe a year ago, I said, look how funny, that's Aunt Rosie, that's Dad's sister doing that. And she said, but you're not going to tell anybody, are you? Like, don't tell anybody that. And this is 50 years later.
I think it's out.
Yeah. She's like, that's
her first funeral last January of 2020.
Yes.
It was an honor seeing them there. And they, I'm sure, had some stories. I was trying to speak a little Spanish. And was their native language Portuguese?
No, they all grew up in Buenos Aires, which is Spanish. And then by ethnicity, we're Armenian, big Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day today, big date for us. And so they were multilingual. My dad spoke 8 languages, his parents and his sisters, Turkish, Greek, Armenian, Spanish, English. It was, and maybe that also kind of protected him with kayfabe, because out in public, it was always ironic that he would grunt and growl in the ring and people didn't think that he was even literate. And so that probably saved him a little bit too, that people wouldn't come up to him expecting some big discourse. He could just kind of growl and snarl and they would walk away from him. So
remember I told you in 75, he debuted. So he did the angle with the Sheik in Detroit. And then that was the way Sheik sent him to LA along with several Detroit performers like Killer Tim Brooks. And he was selling it, but he was in Los Angeles, and it was huge because another Detroit guy, long-timer Ernie Ladd, he came in, beat him immediately with the El Garfio for our singles title, and then went back, completed the thing with the Sheik, and then he debuts in the AWA for Vernon. I was there that night because I'd flown in with the Valiants. They'd finished up in New York, so they're debuting, and it was the opening match on a little show in Champaign, Illinois. Your dad and Joe LeDuc against the Valiant brothers. And I go, man, this would be a main event in quite a few other places. And, and Jimmy Valiant, Jim Vallon started in Detroit. That was his, as Mark knows. So many guys started there, and so many, like your dad, had that amazing history there. Like most people think, Australia, maybe they think of Firp against Bruno or Pedro in the Tri-WF, particularly 72, but always Detroit and Honolulu and San Francisco is missing link. And
it meant so much to me that Mark Bujan had that first-person recollection of all of it, because some of the historians who are just so prolific, like Tim Hornbaker comes to mind, but I think Tim's probably my age or maybe a little younger than I am. And so, he didn't see the things firsthand live in the audience that Mark Bujan did. And that's not to take anything away from Tim. He's incredible, but to have somebody like Mark who was able to talk to my dad and remind my dad about his own memories of the Detroit territory was just precious. And like Evan and Mark and all of you have mentioned, he just was a selfless person. If I needed to call him on a Sunday, call me on a Sunday, no problem. He sent Christmas cards to me every year. He sent Christmas cards to my dad, just telling him like how much he still appreciated his work. And it's just priceless. It was a very selfless thing to do, and the hours and hours that he spent preserving that history and also making sure that it was accurate. And maybe Mark would have been one of the handful of people who actually knew that it was accurate, but he had that ethical precision to just make sure that whatever he was recording was real.
And Buddy, please show some pictures. Mark forwarded some pictures for us.
I thought I already did share them. Let me try this again.
I didn't see it. We all look like we're in some forest or Yosemite or something.
Yeah, there's some weird back screen here.
Okay, let me try that again and see if this works here. Coming soon.
Well, we're waiting.
There we are. I think this is. There we go. That's.
Now, Mark had a tremendous. There are some gentlemen from the CAC. Mark had a tremendous admiration and affection for Michigan waterways. And here, in this particular photo, he is actually a bridge operator. Hopefully you can see me partially describe him. Actually, when you see the drawbridge come up, it would be Mark hitting the appropriate buttons. Mark,
well, let's do a slideshow, buddy. This is the Backstreet Boys circa 2020.
That looks like Count Grog, another Detroit, Ohio historian on the right, and then that's Greg Oliver's writing partner for all those ECW press books, second from the right. I don't know why his name is escaping me, but you look on any of it, like the tag teams and faces and etc. books, and he's quite the historian himself. I'm not sure of the second from the left with a Hall of Fame shirt, and that's Mark Bujan, obviously, on the left.
And there's Mark's great admiration for waterways. There is just about to start a fishing adventure for himself there. There's Flying Fred Curry.
On the left.
Correct.
Well, his dad had some battles with Firp. They were about the same size. They weren't the tallest guys, but they were human dynamos. Sheik, Bull Curry, who was out of this world amazing. Firp, who also out of this world amazing. So beloved in Los Angeles. I got to keep saying that. When he debuted, came in from Detroit, we needed a babyface, and he was a killer babyface, speaking in both Spanish and English, even though we had 6 to 7 other languages he could speak. He could have appealed to the Japanese because he kept telling me he was trying to learn Japanese, from his.
Well, I have to go backwards here.
Who's the guy on the right?
Oh, I should point out. Well, that's
this guy. Somebody stole his neck. Who is this guy?
That we lost also Sheik's son, who wrestled as captain, but Eddie Jr. passed away like the week before Mark did. Mark died on.
Well, it was a little before that. Mark was in constant communication with Eddie Jr., and also Mark was instrumental. Eddie Jr. was a gentleman that had a great admiration for music and for country music.
All right, hold on.
Mark was instrumental in getting Eddie Jr. with the proper people, if you will, to actually get Eddie Jr.'s music on the radio or heard by the general public. What you're looking at right now is a story here on Captain Ed George, which is what Eddie Jr.'s character name was. But this is part of Mark Bujan's personal collection.
That actually looks like Sheik there. If you look at him, Eddie Jr. resembled Eddie Farhad quite a bit, whose fan club I ran in the 60s. Is that all the photos we've got?
I got
you've got 20 photos there, Mike.
Yeah, Mark, narrate.
Well, this is Mark when he was hosting a radio show with a gentleman that was his colleague, and I'm sure, Mike, you're going to know all about it since you are aware of his promoting powers. This picture was taken by his colleague who was promoting shows out in Birch Run.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's
there's another gentleman that I'm sure everybody knows on the extreme side of Mark. That is Tom Burke.
Right. And Ross Hart, Stu's son, wrestling son, great friend of ours in the center.
This is another piece of Mark Bujan's personal collection.
Do you know, Mark, is his collection going to go to like the Iowa Museum? That's where I kind of urge people to send it to the Thez Tragus, the real Hall of Fame museum, not to WWE that's buying up stuff left and right and it's just going to sit in their archives like they tried to do with...
There are a number of people that are interested in his archive. There may be an announcement made later.
Is WWE buying stuff, or are they asking for stuff? They asked Johnny Valiant for his ring jacket. They didn't offer a penny.
Well, now that's the subject of their TV show. They had offered me, for example, they wanted to buy all my photos that I had taken and then stuff I have going back to the 1880s France, and I didn't want to sell because I would have lost control. But a lot of the talent, they had the balls to ask them just to donate it. And there's no physical Hall of Fame. So, Mark, that's why I'm saying with Mark's collection, rather than just have individual collectors have it and nobody get to enjoy it, if you donate it to an ethical museum, the Iowa one is the best, everybody from around the world comes there and can enjoy it. It's under plexiglass, it's protected, as opposed to...
I will only speculate, Mike, that Mark's collection will go in good hands.
Yeah, that just doesn't mean that people can look at it, though, when it goes to private collections. Like Harry White sold the Missouri State title to somebody in Japan when he got...
Well, once again, it's all a matter of keeping Mark's memory and legacy. And if that information is not freely accessible, locked away somewhere in a museum, it's going to be kind of tough.
Well, the Iowa Museum is on display. It's on.
Well, I'm not going to Iowa to see anything. Are you?
Well, everybody goes there. It's
well, then you cover my ticket, pal. And I'm on my way.
Wait, let's go back to that program. That's very cool because that's during the war. The particulars on this Kobo Chic program
from 1968.
Is it 68?
Yeah,
I believe so.
Look at the just over a year old.
Yeah, look at the damn opener. It's Dandy Dan Miller against Ox Baker, which would, hell of a match. Von Raschke, Jimmy Von Raschke, Baron Von Raschke in the second from the bottom. Full of great talent. Jesse the Bull Ortega there. Freddie Blassie against Paul Christie, who later worked for Bruiser when he came in to run opposition to Sheik. The
kind of card that Pampero Firpo should have been on.
Well, he was in Hawaii main eventing as missing link for Ed Francis and Lord Blears there. But look at that. That's not Art Skoland. That's Arnie Skoland against T-Bolt Patterson, because Arnie Skoland was teaming maybe about that time or a little later with J.J. Dillon as James Dillon. That was his first territory. And, Bulldog Brower, the Hells Angels, Danny Hodge against Killer Carl Cox. That had to have been one of the stiffest matches ever. And then, of course, the second only time that Ernie Roth as Abdullah Farouk wrestled with the Sheik. He did that in Los Angeles in Bakersfield against the Tolis brothers in 72. But here much earlier, Abdullah Farouk teaming with the Sheik against Lord Athol Leighton, the great announcer, fantastic announcer, and Bobo. Wow, big card, major card.
Well, as a very good portion of them were in Detroit. Also, in mentioning about Abdullah Farouk tag teaming with the Sheik, I believe he also did that at least once in Toronto.
I'd have to ask.
You can check it.
Yeah, it's just hard. We were trying to, Dave Brzezinski and I, who does the weekly Big Time Memories thing, and he's got one special. He does them once a week, Big Time Memories on YouTube. One was on Firp. The latest one that came out last night was on the Fabulous Kangaroos, Al Costello, Roy Heffernan, Don Kent, and all the incarnations there. So now who is Mark posing with there on the left? That looks like a kitchen.
That is at Detroit's Lafayette, Coney Island, which Mark was a great fan of.
Is that an amusement park?
In mentioning your friend, Mr. Brzezinski, it's I'm looking forward to see whatever kind of memorial he's going to do.
I think he may have done one already.
No, he
There
hasn't.
was one. There was a podcast already on Mark before.
I participated in that too. That was a matter of sound bites, and that was very well done by Dave Dynasty. Dave participated in it. I'm looking forward to whatever Dave himself may do.
Let me ask you though, on that other about the Coney Island. Is that an amusement park, or what is Detroit or Michigan's Coney Island?
Those are hot dogs with chili, mustard, and onions.
Okay, so it's not an amusement. It's not an amusement park like the New York historic one. I was hoping.
No, that's Lafayette, Coney Island. Just as you yourself identified, Mike, that indeed is a kitchen/restaurant. And I know I've been there for quite a few years.
Yeah, Mark. Bujan,
we're almost time for dinner out here on the West, so it's
Mark Bujan.
A good suggestion, maybe.
You're making Buddy hungry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, California has chili dogs, but they don't have conies. They'll have them with they're just not tweaked just right. Because as I'm sure you know, Mike, I also am in California.
Are you in California now?
I'm sorry?
You're in California right now?
Not right now, but I've been there for 7 years. Matter of fact, I was there when you ran into me at CAC back in 2015. But you must have been in a hurry because you walked by pretty quick.
No, well, I'm the club photographer, so I'm always stuck running around. But wait a minute. Though CAC wasn't in LA, it was in Vegas. But there on that chic Rocky Johnson poster, there's Bull Curry on the lower right.
Yeah, that's a reproduction poster created by somebody.
Okay.
That's not an original poster.
Because I don't remember them being poster boards. I could be wrong. You guys would know. In Detroit, the few times I came in, I never saw poster boards like that. Like Roy Shire had those for every show from 1961.
Once again, that is not an original poster. That was created by somebody.
So you don't know if Chic ever had those kind of posters. He had great newspaper ads, like the Toronto ones for Maple Leaf.
Yeah, those are quite a bit put on the history Facebook page that Mark created. Matter of fact, I put those up.
Green Hornet. Which territory is this? Is this Michigan?
Well, it's promoter Bill Thornton. So, Mike.
I'm not familiar with Bill Thornton, so that might be going back before the Rubies and others in.
I would say that's either early '60s, possibly late '50s.
No, it says 41.
That's part of Mark's collection.
Yeah, no, that might be 1941 there. It says 41 up at the top, and that's when Flash Gordon was working.
Could be. And that's Mark in his office. And sadly, that's where he expired. Wow. Now there is Mark with Jim Lancaster. That was his character name on the rather girthy gentleman sitting opposite Mark. Mark has his back to us.
And who's the woman there?
I believe that is the daughter of, I want to say Chief Whitehall, but I could be wrong. Oh. My memory starts to go, it's not as good as other people's.
Who's on the far right in the kind of reddish shirt?
That I don't know. Sadly, I need new glasses.
Okay.
But the primaries are Bujan and Big Jim Lancaster, who started out as a wrestler and, among other things, was also a promoter.
Jim worked on the Chic shows towards the end.
I beg your pardon?
Jim worked on Chic's Kobo cards towards the end of some of his TVs.
And there's Mark with one of his dogs. Now, this photograph was taken by a gentleman I'm sure you know named Gary Rowell.
Yep. With the body presses in the back. Who's the female worker? She looks more up to date.
She is contemporary, and that I do not know.
Mary, your dad's right behind her.
There you go.
Well,
By the way, Mary, as a sideline, and speaking about your father, I had the pleasure of seeing him in action, if you will, many times at Cobo, even at the Michigan State Fairgrounds, which the Sheik occasionally had shows there, as both the tag team partner of the Sheik, and one time that I had the opportunity to see him go against the Sheik, and I will tell you, Pampero Firpo was one of my favorites, and still is.
Yeah, we all loved him.
There he is with Fred Curry and his son Nick, and the woman I do not know.
That's his wife, and Fred had two sons. One who began wrestling for Evan for Sheldon Goldberg. That was the first territory to feature Fred's older son, which I think he was billed as Fred Curry Jr. And then he, for some reason, stopped wrestling maybe 15 years ago. And then more recently, when I interviewed Fred, or had him on one of those COVID cons, he had his younger son who wanted to get into the business and was hoping to get into AEW and send them a tape and all of that. So that's pretty cool. Third generation guys, Bull Curry being total legend, grandfather, Flying Fred Curry, totally different style than Bull Curry there on the far left. And
Nick Curry is excellent. I've seen him in New York, and he wrote a very nice, eulogy. I shouldn't say eulogy. A nice tribute to Mark Bujan. He posted it on his Facebook page. And Nick is a great wrestler, and I hope he has great success like the rest of his family.
He was a good kid.
Mark was in quite constant communication, as Mary had said, with Fred Curry.
Yeah, you could tell he was very moved, by Mark. It was a touching tribute that he wrote.
Look at this card. So this had to have been obviously in the 60s, probably 67, 68. Sheik.
No, this was in the mid to late 70s when the Sheik had.
Oh, right. You're right. Right after Bruiser had rejoined, he had to give up taking on challenging Sheik in Detroit. So, geez, Abby no-showed. He's scratched out. I'm not sure if we can read who filled in from it. Doesn't look like Mark Lewin showed up either. Yeah, you're right. And Cannon, are we going to assume that was Crybaby George Cannon?
No, Cannon. Yeah, that was George Cannon.
Austin Idol. Wow, that's pretty. Well, yeah, you're right, because Walter Johnson, Sheik sent him in, former football player, to us in Los Angeles in 1980, where he teamed with Fred Blassie against John Tolis and a heel Victor Rivera. Al Costello, who's still, he didn't make that card. He was on his waning days as a worker. And Donnie Fargo, pretty interesting. He's second from the bottom. Big Red Reese, who worked for Ole Anderson in Georgia Championship and was trained by Sheik. And I'm not sure who Wayne would be. And it just says midgets. It doesn't say which ones.
And this also is from Mark's private collection.
So what year? Because this was after Sheik and Bruiser had their, I think
Sheik and Bruiser were wrestling each other back in 1973 or 4, which I attended
later. I think it was 75 when Sheik finally or Bruiser finally gave in the goat. He maintained his Indianapolis WWA, but he gave up the Detroit office, and then a few of the talents like Sailor Art Thomas and Dick himself, Dick Afflis, the Bruiser, then worked for some of the Sheik's cards. But it's interesting. I didn't even know they teamed up, and that was at the fairgrounds, Mark, you were talking about there.
Now we're back in Central Park.
Oh,
okay,
hold on.
If it's possible, buddy.
Yes.
I don't know if I sent you this, and again, it's with my memory. So bear with the ancient way I'm going to attempt to do this here, but now you can't see.
I don't think it likes your blue screen.
One of the things that Mark did, and I apologize for that, forgive me, is that Mark started a pro wrestling hotline, which originally was, he had it a 1-800 number. However, that turned into a rather interesting situation because if you may recall, when somebody calls you on a 1-800 number, the caller doesn't pay for it. The person receiving the call does. And apparently, after a series of getting several rather high-priced phone bills, it was decided to change it to a regular, I guess you would call it a regular area code. Bear with me, please, ladies and gentlemen. I can't see. I got to take my glass off. So this particular flyer that I have here, Mark changed it to the area code 248. But just for your own information, it was the Pro Wrestling Hotline, the #1 hotline for wrestling information. It proceeded to give the phone number and the things that you could find out on the Pro Wrestling Hotline, stated by Mark Bujan himself, was Detroit wrestling history of Cobo Arena, Olympia Stadium, the glory days of wrestling, where are they now, local wrestling shows, which at that time there were a few, and they still continue to this day. Old resorts, old results and more. A look back at Detroit wrestling history and legends. Ask Mark your wrestling questions. And then it had email Mark, and it gave his email address, and it said the hotline was updated daily. So this man pulled out all the stops when it came to history, when it came to information. And this is why, if I become repetitive, please forgive me. This is an incredible loss, not only to Mark's family and friends, to his associates and acquaintances in all of his interests and careers, but our subject is the pro wrestling world. You have no idea of what you have lost. And when you start asking questions, Mary, as you found out, and others that you were relaying, you called Mark. And if Mark didn't know it, he tried his doggonedest and then some, I got to put these back on, to find out. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know who else will do that with the intensity and dedication that Mark had.
Yeah. And again, with no profit motive, he did it because he loved it. This
in the heart.
There are guys who have websites making all kinds of crazy money. They would die before they throw $5 into a GoFundMe for a wrestler in need. And Mark was the exact opposite. He couldn't do enough for everybody. So,
I agree.
Yeah.
And it just, I can't even, I'm sorry, I cannot even begin to describe it. Mark, also, one thing that I believe Mary, and again, bear with my memory, please, was either you and your brother. Mark's wish was to do a documentary. He was collaborating with me. And this one was going to take Mark and I all over North America. We had personalities, estates, if the individual was no longer available. We were going to go to Canada. We were going to you on the West Coast. We were going to go to Florida. Evan, you were involved. We were going on the East Coast. It would have been.
What was it going to be about? What was it going to be about, though?
About 2 hours.
No,
that's an old joke. That's an old joke. Yeah. Yes.
What's the very subject of this? Wrestling in general, or wrestling history?
And how, I'm telling you. History and how the personalities, what they have done after the fact, how they have adjusted, how they have done things as years have progressed, if you will. And it was people that were not ever on camera, or at least not on camera with any regularity. Sometimes there are people that will become, you see them all over, whether it's of the past or whether it's contemporary. You look here and there they are. They're on the internet, or they're online, or they're on TV, or they're writing something, or anywhere you look, doggone it, there's Joe Blow. Well, it's going to get to a point when Joe Blow, I don't want to see Joe Blow anymore. I've seen him and heard him too much. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is called oversaturation. And our project was going to be with personalities and estates of characters that are not in the limelight, but are fondly remembered. And Mary, you and your brother were part of that. Fred Curry was, Greg Valentine was, a number of other individuals and their estates in Canada, you know. But that's what it was. And sadly, unless there is an alternative that can come up, that project has gone with Mark. And that is to the loss of the world. And I will not only say to the wrestling world, but to the world in general. Because speaking for myself, whenever I did a project, it was not for the wrestling fan alone. It was for the general public to educate and inform. So
we've got to wind up. Let's, Mary, let's go to you and see if you've got any things or charities or anything to plug or mention here on our Mark Bujan tribute.
Yeah, thank you. Well, again, I'm just really glad to be a part of it, and what a sad loss, like Mark just mentioned. And like Mark just said, it's heartbreaking that people who do these things from their heart without profit, just to remember and share the history, are leaving us. So it's, I have a very small part of trying to preserve some of the history and show some of those collections that hopefully Mark and Mark could have, I would have loved to have shown them had they made it out here in person. And I have a Twitter account that I run, and it's my only social media. It's P as in Pampero Firpo, F-I-R-P-O, P Firpo with the numeral 1 on Twitter. And then my brother is just a member of the Mark Bujan's groups on Facebook, the Detroit, Ohio, and Toronto Memories. My brother, John Kochmanian, is just on Facebook as himself. And we love hearing stories about our dad. And I'm really going to miss, like Mark N just said, sometimes we're not even aware right now, like how devastating the loss is, because when something comes into me, it's one less person I can talk to. And like Mark said too, he just went above and beyond to answer emails, make phone calls, make those connections just out of the goodness of his heart. And I always got the sense too that Mark Bujan, he mentioned this on the Dave Dynasty show, that those pivotal memories that were part of his boyhood and part of his youth that always stayed with him. And I think that a lot of what he did was gratitude for that. Like, that brought him so much joy, and then he wanted to share that and give back. And that's so important, because a lot of people don't give back, like you just mentioned about like a GoFundMe, and some people don't even contribute, and he gave back his time, his treasure, and his talents. Just devastating. So yeah, so yes, Mike, I have the Twitter account, and then also I know that all of you are involved in Cauliflower Alley Club, and there's a t-shirt that Al Snow's company, Collar and Elbow, the wrestling clothing company, made for my dad with the line, "Who still remembers Pampero Firpo," which is the opening line of the Jim Cornette Drive-Thru podcast, which I'm a big fan of, listening to that history. And the shirt is linked, right? It's pinned on the top of my Twitter, and it's at Collar and Elbow. It's a Pampero Firpo t-shirt, and any of the profits or proceeds from the t-shirt go 100% to Cauliflower Alley Club.
Mary, there's one question I've got to ask, because
Sure.
if I didn't ask you during the hour, I'd regret it. And that is, did your dad ever put the claw on you or your brother?
He would do it, I think, kind of jokingly, like he would just put, and I have huge, I'm 5'6", and my dad was 5'8". I have these huge hands. I go, that's what I got from my dad. I just have these here. That's the El Garfio. And sometimes, if I see people from the wrestling business, I was really excited. I was able to go to an MLW show. I'd never gone in Chicago in 2019 in the summer, and the Von Erich boys were there. And I contacted Kevin Von Erich through Twitter and sent him some of the cards and programs that my dad had with Fritz. And then my dad wrestled in Puerto Rico with David and Kerry, and they had a card together, and I sent those to Kevin. And anyway, Jim Cornette was on the commentary, and the Von Erichs, Ross and Marshall, were in the ring, and it was just so cool. And I was sitting, and Cornette looks at me, and at the same time, we both did this, like that's the. So that's it. Just was. It was.
I was
so
always
cool.
a big fan. So I'm
Yeah,
glad
he never put it on us and squeeze. He did, like, I think I asked him one time, like, what did that feel like? And he started applying a little pressure, and I like tapped out. Okay, that's enough. That's enough. I mean, he always had those little grip hand strength things that he was like always cranking on. I mean, he was such a strong, powerful, like physically powerful guy. He just, and it would just go from like 0 to 60, like just a little pressure. And it's like, okay. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Barry, I've never asked this because I tried looking it up in a Spanish to English book, but is Garfio mean claw in Spanish, Espanol?
So my dad always said Garfio is the claw. The claw.
Oh, okay, so that's what it means in Spanish, the claw, because I could never find out an exact definition in Spanish for it.
Yeah, and Mark had said in his notes on the Dave Dynasty show that my dad had, when he mentioned something about the El Garfio, like he brought that into Detroit, like in the 70s. Like he said, at that time he'd started using that hold because prior to that he was using a submission bear hug submission hold. So he developed El Garfio later, and he worked in his first territory in Texas. Like he worked around Fritz, and he worked with Jim Raschke and AWA. So I wonder if that was something he just developed later, like after working with them, like a claw versus claw or a, So anyway, I just appreciate every time Mark dropped a little knowledge like that. The wrestlers always say like they sit under the learning tree, right? And I was like, I'm going to make a note of that. So I'll certainly miss those exchanges a lot.
And Mary, in New York, your dad was here in the early 70s. He wrestled Pedro at Madison Square Garden, Pedro Morales. And we got the LA tapings, and we were watching your dad in the 70s. So I have fond memories of him also. Pampero Firpo is one of the all-time greats. And, and it's great that guys like Mark Bujan have helped to keep that legacy alive because there's not a mountain of video out there on your dad. So it's great.
Yeah, there's not. And actually, Evan, you're too young, but he was in New York in the late 50s, early 60s. With Bruno and Rocca. And when Antonino Rocca was teaming with Miguel Perez, and then my dad came in and worked with Rocca. And that was a big part of my dad's story, too. Rocca was his boyhood hero in Argentina. Rocca, I think, was about 10 years older than my dad. And Rocca was the one who gave my dad his push and his entree to go to Madison Square Garden from Texas. That was a big thrill. And Bruno was on some of those cards too. He had great affection for Rocca and for Bruno and for Pedro too. That's great. He was in New York at Madison Square Garden, but also at Sunnyside Gardens, I think, is that Long Island?
Many times.
Yeah. I'm sorry I missed all of that. I missed it all. I was not even a twinkle in his eye yet. So.
By the way, Mary, I would like to.
The WrestleMania.
I would like to, Mary, excuse me. Pardon me.
As Lanny's Paphos guest, and when we were at the press boxes for Mania, etc., and I dragged Bruno. I just told Bruno, and he ran over there to take pictures and stuff. You guys got the shot, or I think John did, of your dad and Bruno, and they really, that was the last time because Bruno would pass away a little bit later. And that was kind of a magic moment for, any of us seeing those two guys back together again, having been friends since the 50s.
Yeah. Bruno looked like he couldn't believe it. Like, I just can't even believe that I'm seeing you here. And Bruno, with his voice, he said, Pampero Firpo, like the way he said it. I got that on video. And not only Bruno, but in that hallway there, Mike, you probably remember we saw Roddy Piper, and then he passed away a couple months later. It just broke my heart. So that was in 2015 in San Jose. I was really grateful to Lanny that he was able to bring us down there. But what were you saying, Mark? I think you.
Well, what I wanted to say, Mary, and thank you, by the way, but also thank you personally for joining us on this program that you were kind enough to do. And I can think of no better character, a personality to share the Mark Bujan Memorial than the daughter of the eighth wonder of the world, the wild bull of the Pampas, Pampero Firpo. So I just wanted to say I thank you. I thank you, and hopefully if given the opportunity, I would like to communicate with you a little bit too.
Yeah, anytime. It was my pleasure. And Mike knows how to get in touch with me. I don't know, Mark, if you're on Twitter, but Mike has my email and my phone number, and anytime. anytime. I'd love to talk to you. And we, like you said, as a family member, I just was so grateful that people like Mark preserved that history and shared it with me and with others. Loved my dad and loved Detroit. And, Mark was still living. I think he just moved maybe a year before he passed, right? He was living in Oak Park, maybe?
Yeah, not too long. He was, well, the one thing, yes, he did relocate. But what I was going to get at, the important thing, I feel, for all of us and for the people that are watching this program and a heck of a lot more, is to keep the legacy of Mark Bujan going. Every little bit, sharing a story. No two people really have the same remembrance. I saw something this way. You were at the same event and you saw something that way. But pooling that information just gives you a broader memory, and hopefully, at the very least, it'll make you smile and put you in that frame of mind of a wonderful memory, because you shared something that I didn't know, and hopefully vice versa. So it's up to us, I believe, as a community, to continue Mark's legacy, and not after, be it 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, when either we are together again or each of you individually, and somebody says, I wonder what Mark Bujan would have said. And the worst thing would be if somebody said, who? Can't let that happen.
It's going to have to get here forever.
On that note, I think that's a good way to wrap everything up, and really appreciate everybody's contributions tonight. And we'd love to have you back on again, Mary, in the near future. And it's great to have you back here again, Mark.
I'd like to thank Buddy for the amazing CGI. He's going to beam us out of this park in a few minutes.
Why is he the largest character out of all of our? This is the weirdest thing I've seen in a long time.
Well, hey, look. I don't say that I'm a master of Skype. It's always a new experience when I'm.
You look like Gigantorus.
I have no idea. I have it on like the grid view, what it's called, large grid view. I had it on this before, but I don't know how that. It looks different from my end than it does on your guys'
It's
end.
like we're all sitting in Central Park, but only our heads. It's kind of surreal. Yeah.
Well, I'll have to.
So
It's all technical stuff, and maybe I'll have to work on it a little bit harder to make it all match up next time. But anyway,
it's like a '60s grindhouse film, right, Mark?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But thank you everyone for being here this week, and really appreciate all your wonderful input, and love to hear the history about your dad, Mary.
R.I.P. Mark Bujan, R.I.P. Pampero Firpo, R.I.P. all the legends.
Thank you very much.
Tom Farhat, Mark Bujan, any number of wrestling personalities and fans. May they all rest in peace, and their memory, and Pampero Firpo, of course, may their memories be preserved.
Right,
good night, everyone.
Amen to that.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.